Brian Charnley was a British artist born in September 1949, a man whose extraordinary creativity emerged alongside a deep inner struggle. Like many of his contemporaries, he battled schizophrenia, a condition that would shape his life. One day, he decided to stop taking his meds, painting a series of self-portraits as he gradually reduced the dosage. The result is an unfiltered descent into his mind. Each painting offers a glimpse into a realm we may never understand, a state where perception is no longer anchored and what remains lies fragmented. This is the other side of consciousness, and while it's a place most may not be aware of, it's also one most of us have drifted through before. Some venture here by choice, using psychedelics to explore their mind. Others through fate, driven by forces beyond their control. Either way, I'd like to welcome you to the realm of altered states. To explore altered states of consciousness, there first needs to be a control condition that we can compare it to. For most, this would be what we call your normal everyday experience. But quickly, this assumption starts to unravel, as normal is itself a carefully curated illusion, built on predictions the mind uses to interpret reality. This doesn't mean objective truth is an illusion. Physical laws exist independent of our perception of them. And yet, what it does mean is that consciousness doesn't simply see reality. It builds a version of it with the self as the reference point, which opens up an interesting opportunity. If consciousness is the ability to shape reality as we experience it, what happens when we take that away? When we disrupt the mind's predictive filters and look deeper? Perhaps we'll find that the mind's grip on reality is more fragile than we realize. Legend has it, the structure of the benzene ring was discovered in a dream. Whether this is true is still debated, but what remains undeniable is the role of dreams throughout our history. Long before labs and data, dreams were humanity's first experiment, a place untouched by physical constraints. But because dreams are so seemingly random, early humans had no way of explaining what was happening to them. So they did what we humans have always done. They searched for meaning. At first, they saw dreams as prophetic messages from their gods, an early hypothesis into other forms of consciousness. But slowly, our ancestors turned inwards, searching for clues that could help them understand the world around them. And while in the process they were wrong about many things, they were right about one. Dreams were doing something, and more often than not, it was anything but comforting. Statistically speaking, the majority of people are likely to experience two nightmares above all others: the sensation of falling and the terror of being chased. Both are cross-cultural and both are generational, with documents suggesting they've been haunting humanity as far back as ancient China and ancient Egypt. At first, there seems to be a simple explanation. Both basophobia, the fear of falling, and diacophobia, the fear of being chased, likely stem from our time as prey animals, or surfacing in our nightmares as a built-in threat rehearsal. But both of these fears rely on our senses, something noticeably absent when sleeping. With no sensory input and a brain deprived of data, the mind doesn't simply shut off when confronted with a void. Instead, it turns inward, grasping at whatever to create a coherent frame of reality. The outcome is a world built from memories, from feeling, and from fear, at the heart of which lies you, the self, the reference point, the one who's being hunted and the one who's falling down. Except this can't be the whole picture, because if you're the one experiencing the fear, then who's the one creating it? This is the paradox that nightmares expose us to, a split where the architect is also the experiencer, where the one who's falling down is also the abyss they're falling into. When we're awake, it's theorized that the brain works by constantly anticipating reality, using the senses to update itself as new information comes in. This only works because we have an environment we can test and adjust our models against, keeping our sense of self stable. However, This stability is not an inherent property. It's something the brain constructs, and in nightmares, it can't. The absence of environment to anchor to prevents it from getting feedback, so it adjusts by creating its own. But in doing so, it breaks the stability we depend on, leaving a warped and twisted world in its wake. This disruption, along with the underlying parts at play, demonstrate just how dependent consciousness is on a constant flow of information. But we don't have to be asleep to keep testing the boundaries. The human mind already hangs by a thread and relies on a delicate balance of different things to operate smoothly. Disrupt any one of these processes, and it's at your own risk. But we don't have to interfere with these mechanisms to see it for ourselves. Optical illusions offer an entry point. In the checkered shadow illusion, these two squares are actually the same color, but because there is a shadow, the brain makes assumptions about what it expects, ignoring the raw data in the process. In the motion-induced blindness illusion, staring at static dots long enough causes them to disappear, since the mind prioritizes motion above all else. But if you really want to play with your perception, try the game Anamorphosis, where size and distance bend reality, tricking the player into thinking there are entry points where none exist. All of these examples, while primarily perception-based, expose how dependent we are on expectations. This happens because the brain is more concerned with creating a stable picture of the world than it is with accurately processing it. Now imagine this, except 1,000 times stronger and on steroids. That's what psychedelics feel like. Medicine for the soul. That's how Albert Hofmann, the creator of LSD, described his experiences. To him, psychedelics weren't just an intoxicating substance. They had the power to reconnect modern humans with a deeper understanding of existence. And he's not alone. The most common experience reported by those who've taken hallucinogens is ego dissolution, a moment where the boundaries between you and the external world disappear, leaving an overwhelming sense of unity with the universe. For some, it's euphoric, described as a type of cosmic homecoming. For others, it's terrifying and leaves a lasting existential footprint. Either way, the lesson is the same. The self, the thing we hold on to oh so tightly, may not be as solid as we think. Psychedelics work by binding and activating serotonin receptors, specifically the 5-H2A variety, which are most prominent in the default mode network, the part of the brain that acts like the control center, organizing thoughts and suppressing unnecessary info. When psychedelics enter the system, they overstimulate this region, breaking down the usual hierarchical-based prediction mechanism we depend on. Without this, the brain scrambles and adjusts by creating new connections between parts of the brain that don't normally interact. The adjustment stops the brain from filtering anything out and makes all sensory information equally important. The result is the chaotic state known as the entropic brain, where everything that's picked up on floods the mind all at once. In principle, it's very similar to dreams, which also quiet the default mode network and dissolve the self. But the difference is that you're awake. And because you're awake, the brain continues to adjust using the external world. This is why people report such bizarre occurrences like being able to taste the color blue or feel the touch of a bird's chirp. Everything just blends together, new patterns are unlocked, and trees look like they're breathing. I guess the best way to explain it is that everything you think and feel doesn't feel like it's coming from you. It feels like it's coming from the world, which, if true, implies the brain can generate a wide range of conscious states, suggesting that our individuality, our sense of self, may not be a fundamental aspect of consciousness, and instead, an emergent property of the brain's predictions. While dreams and psychedelics both involve a level of disorientation, flow states operate on a single-minded precision and are characterized by a perfect zone where every action feels effortless and every movement purposeful. The best way to explain it is as a state of pure execution, where there is no fear and there is no thinking. It's most often triggered in high-stakes, high-intensity environments, and I'm sure you've seen it referred to before. The zone, locked in, be like water. These are all descriptions of the same phenomena. But here's the thing, flow states still involve a loss of self-consciousness. It's a paradox where you have pure control without conscious control. And that's because this state is transient. once again responsible for the quieting of the default mode network, but this time in a way that's controlled, as intense focus on a task amplifies the task-positive network, which indirectly suppresses the default mode network. The result is not a dissolution of the self, but instead a self that disappears, a merging of action and awareness. I've seen Tony Robbins talk about this before, how he overcomes the fear of public speaking by immersing himself so completely in the audience, he forgets he's even there. Michael Jordan and Mike Tyson have also echoed similar sentiments, with Jordan talking about how he went out of his way to not think before a game, and Tyson saying, "You have to train your mind to let go of feeling." All of this leads me to believe that flow states are something consciousness can enter and exit, which if true, means consciousness can be hijacked depending on what we pay attention to. An idea that raises a bunch of interesting questions. Are we at our most conscious when we're fully aware of ourselves, or when we become so absorbed in an experience that the sense of self we constantly dwell on disappears? I don't know, but maybe the next section can offer us some answers. It's no coincidence that some of the most beautiful and deeply emotional creations arise from flow state, from those moments where the person effectively becomes what they're trying to do. And yet, at least in creative spaces, it's not just flow that allows the creator to bring their ideas to life. It's also the chaotic, and sometimes uncomfortable, ability to explore many diverse ideas at once, or in other words, divergent thinking, which hinges on an inhibition of judgment and a similar loosening of thought. This is what forms the basis of creativity, but also its biggest challenge. Eventually, every creator has to be able to find a way of grounding their ideas, of making them make sense, which is incredibly difficult when one can see connections others don't notice. There's a reason why many of history's most visionary artists eventually succumb to schizophrenia, and it's because the same mechanism that fuels creativity is the same one that gets distorted in schizophrenia, a difference we can see in finished products. Uzumaki, rather fittingly, is a manga about obsessions. It revolves around spirals that eventually overwhelm reality. But while gradually evolving to become more surreal, Ito never loses his structure and maintains his narrative logic no matter how abstract the story becomes. In contrast, Louis Wayne started by painting cats, slowly transforming them into intricate, almost hypnotic-like visions through fractal designs. At first, it worked, but slowly, his art became less coherent and eventually lost touch with what he was trying to paint: cats. Which is also what happened to the man whose work first sparked my interest in exploring this topic, Brian Charnley, who, unlike Van Gogh, was unable to maintain a clear sense of himself as his disorder progressed, the evidence for which is starkly present in his final paintings, where his attempt at capturing his inner world eventually unraveled into a fragmented mess. A particularly fitting example, since Van Gogh is often thought to have had schizophrenia, even though his work doesn't reflect the disjointed connections that come from the disorder. All of this is to say that both schizophrenia and creativity stem from a stronger ability to detect patterns, both real and imagined. But while creativity can stabilize the ideas in reality, schizophrenia can't, leading to an unsettling tendency to find meaning in everything without being able to verify those interpretations in reality. This is perhaps the key insight that comes from looking into altered states. Consciousness is a paradox. It is both tethered to objective reality, yet free to reshape it, with the brain manipulating raw sensory data just as much as the external world does. And yet, it is only when this process falters, when the brain's ordinary rules break down, that we are able to witness just how delicate that balance really is. Strip creativity of its anchor to reality, and you get schizophrenia. Disrupt the brain's ability to filter things out, and perception dissolves into psychedelic hallucinations. Both are very unstable, but in a way, we're all just a brushstroke away from that instability and glimpse into it all the time, be it in dreams, through viewing optical illusions, or in flow, hinting that this balance is latent in us all and can tip at any time, which is what makes altered states both fascinating and terrifying. They pull back the curtain on just how fragile our sense of reality really is.